Hello and welcome to a global event hosted by Kingspan. At Kingspan, we're curious and we like to ask, what if? And today this is our panel discussion to explore the future of construction materials. So first we're going to ask everybody to introduce themselves. Michael, I'll come to you first.
Okay, my name is Michael Wol. I'm an architect from the Netherlands. As an architectural firm in the Netherlands, we try to create new kind of buildings with circular methods and more bio-based materials, and getting more experience every day. It's a lot of fun. And thanks for being here.
Thanks for coming. Sandra, we'll move to you.
Thanks, Lucy. I am Sandra Debov. I'm the head of innovation for the Kingspan Group here at our innovation centre in Ireland. I've previously worked in marketing roles across a lot of different product sets and product groups in the world of Kingspan, and I've recently started in this very exciting role to drive the innovation agenda for Kingspan, and likewise I'm excited to be here today. Will be a great discussion.
Great. And Benjamin, I'll come to you last.
Thank you. My name is Benjamin Constant. I run a company called NeoEco, and we are specialists in circular economy in general. We are conceiving products in a way that they can be recycled, but we're also dealing with the end of life and the proper recycling of it. And we've pushed a lot of innovative methodologies and innovations in past years to try to fit to regulation and to ambitions of companies like Kingspan and public bodies that are willing to deploy that at a very large scale.
Thank you all. Benjamin, you touched there on how things have changed over the last few years. So how has the built environment changed for you over the last 10 years?
It has massively changed. First, the ambition. I think the ambition of government and bodies in general has really grown. It started probably 20 years ago with a public awareness that transmitted into elected bodies and then into regulation. And now we have quite some potent frameworks to push recycling of materials, eco-conception, so that you really have to think when you launch a product, what's going to happen at the end of its life. Yeah. So these framework have been, in a way, fantastic to promote an environmental agenda, but it is also a must today to comply with that. And it's not only an ambition, it's a carrot and stick, really, which is coming to us. If we don't do it, I think the price for companies not doing it will be dear, and some of them will not exist in a few years if they don't tackle that kind of problems.
Mm-hmm. And Michael, you're nodding away. I presume you agree with those changes over the last 10 years?
Sure, I completely agree. The fact that we have used, we can use new materials and new construction methods completely changes the way I design buildings. So not just for me as an architect, but also for my team. You see that we are studying on different kind of methods and materials. It's very nice to see what's happening these coming years.
And Sandra, are you seeing that come through commercially? So over the last 10 years, have you seen the demand drive due to the regulations that we've just talked about?
Yeah, and I think you made an important point on public awareness, which is quite interesting because everybody kind of knows what sustainability is and what that means in terms of circularity and so on, if you're an expert in the space. So I think it has now arrived in that really end users, building owners are asking for that kind of information as well, although they may not fully understand it yet, and to be honest nobody really does because there's a lot of unknowns still. But I think it has arrived at the point where it's important that, as you say, companies need to act on that, be it an architect or from our point of view from a manufacturing side of things. And what I would add to the whole environmental agenda is an increased focus again on energy efficiency. So energy efficiency has always been there, but now it's almost understood as another way to mitigate climate change and at the same time reduce your energy costs very practically. And over the last couple of years, I think there has been a lot more focus on that. And obviously I'm in the world of insulation materials, and we can see great developments even in the last couple of years where a lot of companies would have improved the thermal performance. And they brought it to a level that wasn't there 10 years ago, which is quite impressive. So now there is a really good range of solutions available to use for architects to design or for buildings owners to use to really optimize the energy efficiency in buildings.
Okay, Thank you. And Michael, would you say that architects today are aware of all of the options that are out there in terms of innovative materials?
No. I don't think they're aware of the let's say the broad variety of materials that can be used when you're designing new buildings. And the fact that as an architect I can adjust the way that I design a building when I have new materials enhanced, let's say, that I can use. So it's very important for me that I have let's say a wide how do you say that the right materials on the right position in the building is very important for me. So right now you see that everything is talking about bio-based and wood and hemp and all these materials, but yeah, there is a wide variety of materials that I need to use to design the buildings in a context.
Yeah, and surely it depends very much on the client specifications as well.
Yeah, well, we try to get the client to wake up and to let them take the next step is very important for me. So, in my opinion, not all the clients know what they want, and they really they have a big ambition, don't know how to answer to this ambition. So that's as an architect, I can really make a difference in a design phase.
Okay, and has that changed your practice quite a lot?
It has. Yeah, I mean, now we are designing less conservative, traditional buildings, of course, which are much adaptive. They are adaptive. They are flexible. They can be reused. And we're talking about different values over these coming years than a traditional building, which is very important for my client as well. So we're trying to create new business cases as well to achieve, let's say, a more sustainable future for these buildings.
Okay. And Benjamin, are you seeing the same type of developments come through?
Yeah, in our case, we have made a very conscious choice in understanding the value chain that you have in the industry, and who are the players that you can lean on and work with to change things, and who are the followers, the ones who will follow specifications, and what is the right moment to intervene. Yeah. One of the key things that we've found out is that when you work with public bodies, you tend to have an auction after, and the auction has specification, and these specifications are propagated to a massive amount of different companies. And we found that way very efficient to try to get some change on the market. So when we do this, we diffuse the good practices. Yeah. And if on top of that we manage to be also at the control level of what's being done, then you have an efficient mechanism to change things. And what we found really interesting is that when we started with that agenda a few years ago, and we were speaking with public body project managers, doesn't need to be necessarily the elected bodies from the territory, but when you start speaking with a project manager, very often they feel that they are followers to the market. Okay. And then there is this whole moment where they discover they're actually holding the pen, and instead of copying and pasting what's been doing in the past 20 years, there is this light bulb moment where they say, hey, I can change stuff. Hey, that's becoming possible. Now that becomes really interesting, because then we can start working with architects. And architects are fundamental because they bring the ideas, they bring the knowledge of what's happening on the industry, and then you get that infused, and these two partners can really beef up the project and make it way more environmentally friendly than if it had been the famous copy and paste from the past 20 years.
So is the industry using the knowledge that architects hold to create new and innovative buildings, would you say?
It's happening. Yeah. I think we all wish it would happening faster. There is no doubt about that.
Of course.
But it is happening. There is a massive movement that is happening. And as we discussed a little bit before, what you've got is a framework, a regulatory framework, which is coming. Some of it is already predicted. Some of it is going to be deployed in the coming years. But we already know what's going to happen. Yeah. Yeah. You act now, you step in today, or you pay the price. Fair enough.
Yeah, right now you see that an architect itself, they are designing a traditional building, and they are changing the materials to more bio-based and more innovative, sustainable materials. And I think that is wrong. Maybe you should trigger the architect to take the next step, that they should redesign the buildings and not as a traditional building anymore. And this is a movement that is gradually going on right now. You see very innovative, new kind of buildings where they use spaces on a different way, which interact on a different way. Sometimes they are more low-tech, than a couple of years ago even. But so it's very interesting to see how also the design process evolves with these new kind of materials.
And so you think we need to take it back a step and go back to the drawing board almost?
I believe so, yeah. That's what we do with our colleagues as well, but also when I teach or tutor on a school, it's a different way of designing and design thinking.
Okay, fantastic. And you mentioned a little bit about bio-based materials and seeing bio-based materials come through more into industry. Are there any other innovative materials that you're seeing come through into the commercial side of things?
It's going too slow, let's say.
Okay.
So there are not many options, and the problem I have with a lot of new materials is that I cannot rely on them. So I do not have the right data to really use them. So no, I think it's not, the movement's not going quick enough, in my opinion.
Okay. And is that in terms of product launches just across the full spectrum?
Yeah, but the fact that I really, we are a medium-sized architectural firm, so I really try to upscale the projects. So, for instance, we have a big social housing project, which is about 100 houses in the Netherlands, that I really try to be, let's say, massively bio-based. Is one of the items right now. But there is just not many materials that can deliver, let's say, 100,000 square meters of bio-based installation products.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and I really have this ambition to take the next step. So it's just not there yet. It's hard, let's say.
And there's that anxiety around the supply chain for new products.
Exactly, yes.
Okay. And Sandra, are you seeing something different come through with innovative materials? Are you seeing a different scale and not just a push towards bio-based?
And I was just going to comment on that comment, actually, in terms of scalability and just to confirm that, actually, because over the last couple of years, and if I take bio-based as an example, we've looked at a lot of different materials, from hemp and wood fibre, which is probably the more obvious, but then you've got straw, you've got mycelium, there's so much out there. And we looked at a lot of different suppliers of the same as well. And what you find in terms of the environment is that there's a lot of startups, small businesses, university spin-offs even, which is great to see. It's amazing to see that so many people are trying to really change something and put something in. But then the next step is obviously, and for us, we would be taking in the materials, we'd really test it, understand it, and learn it. But then in terms of manufacturing it, and how can we achieve that scalability that you're talking about? Because if you're designing a warehouse or a logistic building, you need scale. And that's one of the biggest problems, to find the technology, that works and that performs, not just, and let's just assume that bio-based insulation is actually better in terms of decarbonisation and circularity. But it needs to perform on thermal, it needs to perform on fire. If it's an insulated panel, it needs to have a certain structural performance as well. And it's really hard to find something that ticks all of the boxes. As a matter of fact, there is no magic insulation at the moment.
Really funny to see that these last couple of years, when you have the traditional way of insulating, and Kingspan is a king on that, of course, but the performance is getting better and better and better, and these panels are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. But in fact, a lot of clients I meet, they are only interested in getting it more bio-based. So as an architect, I take the responsibility, and my client takes the responsibility, the walls have to be bigger, or we get different construction methods but we have to use these bio-based materials, which is really strange. So they are ready to lose, let's say, the thermal capacity, but it needs to be bio-based. So, and then I have to design a different kind of wall to
And Benjamin, are you seeing the same kind of demand for bio-based materials?
So I'm not the best position to answer that question. What I would add with what has been just been said is that when you define innovation, obviously there are all the fancy new techy materials, but there is a whole scope of materials been around for we're talking about hemp, straw, stuff that's been around for quite a long time, which is interesting because it's not so techy. What is technical is to understand how they work, how to put them in place. But it's maybe less technical than what you would find. What's interesting with that category is that the circularity index that you can have in these materials can be very high, because the recycling of these materials tends to be easier. So when you go into composite materials or high-level chemistry materials, these are harder to recycle.
Yeah.
Especially composite material, you've got a layered type of sandwich of like so many different types of lettuce in the middle that if you want to split them apart, it's quite difficult. But when you talk about hemp, straw, wood, things like this, and you manage to give them the properties you want, then recycling becomes more interesting. So the innovation that we see coming through the market is mainly on the fact that we are able to reinject part of the existing material more and more inside new materials, and these new materials can hold the same properties as the previous ones. So it's not one for one, obviously, it's a percentage, it's a mix, a formula, but you can recycle more and more, keeping the properties and being at cost, similar types of costs, which is one of the fundamental elements of construction. It's a very cost-driven environment, so if you're able to do that, you have innovation. It might be not the type of innovation that looks like so fancy and glittery, but it is innovation. This is changing the world in a way which is maybe simpler and more accessible than what people would imagine.
And when you talk about pulling it apart to recycle the materials, do you mean designing for deconstruction and modular buildings, off-site buildings?
Absolutely, yeah. You have to really embed in your design process the end of life.
Yeah.
If you don't think about the end of life, then it becomes really complicated. And sometimes the changes are not so great. A lot of products have been designed without end of life in mind. So it's just they're not designed to be managed.
Yeah.
They are designed for linear economy, and they will end up in landfills or being valued for energy, which is better than nothing, but this is not a great option. So how do you recycle material really depends on how you thought the process in the first place. And a designer today cannot just design a product. He needs to think about all these steps, all these elements that are going to happen during the life cycle of the product to be able to be reinjected.
Okay. And you're nodding, Michael. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, it's a complex problem for me as an architect, because I always compose buildings or walls made out of different materials. So how they are going to react to each other, etc., is very important for me, and to get the right permits and also the how do you call them, the EPDs and all these technical theoretical stuff. It has to match. And so it's very hard for me as an architect to compose with all these materials and get one component or one building complete, let's say.
And I would add that this is where Kingspan has a major role to play as a big player in his field. The design of products obviously is one thing, the end of life is another thing, but what happens in the between? Once you've done this, what about collection of waste in the moment of deconstruction? How do you collect that? How do you aggregate it? How do you split the materials? How do you partner with the other element of the value chain that allows you to get that in place? It's very complex problems. It's not insolvable problems. It's just that we need to put some energy in that. And one of the nice things about the project that you're carrying in the UK or France is that you're starting to push for this agenda, and obviously we're all for it.
And I guess, the complexity of the construction market and it being so fragmented in the supply chain adds to that, to the issue of what do you do in the middle and what do you do at the end. And Sandra, is there anything you want to add on end of life?
Loads, but look, I'm no expert on circularity, so I refer here. But I had an interesting conversation recently as part of an industry working group, and it was a small business, Italian business. They do tiles. And they were talking about end of life and all that, and they have it all figured out. They have their own process and they have a collection and so on. And actually, they at one point asked, what if we're not here in 30 years? And we thought, that's a really good question, because they've developed their own process to recycle it that nobody has. They have patented it and everything. So that actually poses a really real problem in 30 years, and generally just, I think from our point of view, look, we'll be there in 50 years, no problem. But that just the point here is that whatever we're doing, we need to do it together. So there's no point in just one company going off and figuring it out by themselves. I mean, that's great, and we need to do that for our own products. But if we're talking about the ecosystem itself, about the collection, about the process itself, I think we all need to work together. The whole industry needs to work together to make this happen, really. So to get to a sustainable model.
Yeah, that's why we build complex building information models and material passports, building passports, so we know what's in our buildings in 30 years, even if these companies do not exist anymore.
Exactly.
And on this point also, we imagine circular economy as fundamentally collaborative, because the company you're describing, it will have catchment area. It will not be, you don't transport waste across a country. That doesn't work. And most companies, you cannot set up recycling at nationwide level. It's too complex because other parties are involved. Aggregation, collection points. You need to think that as a very wide partnership. It's a complex mechanism, and very often you cannot do it alone. You can do it locally, you cannot scale very easily because there is a mutualization of the capital invested in the machineries. For example, they do other things. So very often the good way to do this is partnership, but also to plug into existing things. So who's doing the closest thing to what I need? And then you start thinking, okay, how can we connect that? And that's how you get to scale, and that's how you get to exist in 30 years.
Good point, yeah.
And Michael, you touched on BIM there and the material passport or the digital passport. Is that a digital innovation that you're seeing come through quite heavily?
Quite heavily. It's not an innovation anymore even, so it's common sense for us as in our firm. But yes, it's very, very, very important. Just because of the fact that I want I'm very data driven. I like data, so I just want to show what I did and how I can. Let's say my client has an ambition, and I want to give him the right building matching that ambition. So there's a lot of data that I need to do the right calculations to show him that, all right, we did a good job. Not even for me as an architect, but when I'm finished and I got the permits, then the contractor comes and tries to build this building, and what's he going to do? What's he going to buy? Is he going to buy different materials because they are cheaper, easy to get, etc., etc.? So the whole BIM is a complete process from A to Z, let's say, where it has to be, the data has to be accurate all the time, which is very important in my opinion. So data is, the BIM model itself is one of the things that I really fight for as an architect, because I want to be, let's say, the central person in the design and building process. The contractor might feel the same. So there's always a competition between us as architects and the contractor, which is very interesting.
And are you seeing any digital innovations come through?
AI is one of them, and the fact that we try to predict what's going on in the future is very nice to see. But still, let's say there's a lot to do. A lot of architectural firms, and I think building processes are very traditional. So the opportunities we have are there, but we still have to learn how to use them, or leave a lot of colleagues of mine, I think, will have to use them.
And Benjamin, are you seeing any digital innovations coming through?
Yeah, we are seeing more and more digital beams and data layers that are coming on top. There are plenty of innovative companies around, very quickly modeling things with laser beams and or video feeds, and we are part of ourselves in several projects where you can very quickly modelize a pre-existing infrastructure where the beam doesn't exist, and how do you recreate a basic level of beam very, very quickly so that you know and you can quantify what's in it. That starts to be working. We're doing that, and then you've got projects, research projects. European Union is carrying quite a few of them around in the Horizon compartment, where we are teaming up with a group of companies to have artificial intelligence trying to model from the materials that we are going to be using what would be the energy efficiency from a building. And we're not there yet, but we're working hard.
We'll get there. Okay, thank you. And Sandra, we've talked quite a bit about bio-based and the demand that the industry has put on bio-based or lower embodied carbon products, but I know commercially Kingspan see demand for other types of products with other attributes as well. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah, and that was just a point on there's no magic insulation, unfortunately. So we got to make sure that whatever material we're putting forward in the specification of that material does a job, solves a problem for an architect, for a building owner. So obviously the whole space of insulation material has evolved quite significantly, where you started off with something very traditional and you had good enough energy efficiency and you had a certain level of fire performance and so on, and then it went all the way to advanced materials that again increased the thermal performance. And then we're talking now about really high performing insulation materials, and that I would say in the field of inorganic, I'm not going to go into the details now, but inorganic insulation really, and in this space we can actually do something that wouldn't be possible anywhere else. So you can all of a sudden achieve a combination of fire performance and thermal performance that wouldn't have been there before. And actually, if you get the right material, you can actually take some of the sustainability boxes as well. And an example that we've got recently introduced actually is a silica type insulation. And just to give an example, I'm not doing any advertising here, but just to clarify what I mean with good thermal performance and good fire performance, this achieves a Euro class A2 combined with a thermal conductivity of 0.020. So that's an incredible combination, and maybe I'm just really excited because I'm in the materials space, but it's actually it's really, really good compared to what else is out there. So and there's a lot of other technologies as well that we could potentially look at, but it's obviously understanding what does the market need, what does the customer need, so that we're not just coming up with lots of different options and throwing them on the market where there's actually no need for it. So the portfolio or the spectrum of solutions obviously needs to have a purpose.
Okay, thank you. And we touched earlier on the supply of innovative materials. Are there any other challenges around innovative materials that you find when specifying them? Michael, I'll come to you first.
I don't have to deliver the materials themselves, so I only have to draft them, so that's it's pretty easy. But now the availability is an issue, and also the certification of all these products is a very big issue. So as I mentioned before, in the BIM I'm very data driven, but I don't have the right data to use them to make a difference in that sentence. So availability of the materials is one. The EPDs, the data behind the materials is very important for me as well, and the fact that might be able to scale up is all depends on these kinds of on these elements. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's important.
And Benjamin, what challenges are you seeing when specifying advanced insulation materials?
I think regulation is number one. Like when you bring in an innovative material, then there's a whole host of testing and passing the regulations and getting the right authorization to go ahead.
Yeah.
That costs money, which means that there's a lot of projects that stop there because it's too expensive to do, especially on the innovative small scale, small company side. That is definitely a boundary. When it comes to bio-based, the supply of some types of wood or the supply of some subtype of materials are not hay and not hemp, but if you think about all the need for production and the space it takes, and there are some consequences also in using bio-based materials, and availability of the product is not necessarily always sustainable. So there are only so many trees we can cut, and they don't grow very fast. So that's an issue, and I think that once again you've got to be incredibly pragmatic, thinking, okay, what can I do? What can I achieve? What's reasonable? What's the size in my product range of that product? And can I supply? And can I prescribe? And then you see what balance you put in there. by no means, I think we need to be dogmatic there. We have to be, very pragmatic about what you deploy, how you do it, and mixing bio-based materials and concrete. This is we do that kind of stuff. You try to have the lowest carbon emissions on the concrete. Obviously, there are new technologies that are coming up that you can activate. But being pragmatic is what we need. We've been greenwashing enough. That's okay. We're done with that. Let's move on.
And you raise a good point there. There's not enough natural resources to build the whole building environment with bio-based materials, so we have to be pragmatic about that. And Michael, sorry, you were going to answer that.
I agree. It's but you got to take a step. So be pragmatic, but you got to take a step. Yeah. And if it means that the performances of a lot of materials, they lack the performance, then it's okay. I'll take my responsibility and I'll redesign the building. We need to take the next step, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Just to add on that, I mean, bio-based is great, and I think we've got a job to do to find the right balance. Back to your point on availability and so on, because currently we're talking 100% bio-based or nothing. So I'm sure
that's unfair.
There's surely something in between that might be more efficient, but at the same time, looking at everything else that's already available, and we see in the industry companies making great progress on decarbonising existing insulation technologies or materials, and there's lots of different ways to do that, from using recycled content from your own manufacturing. Even you're putting it back into the process, which is fantastic. So bio-based is one route, of course, but there's also other routes, and the majority of material that's out there already and that's being manufactured every single day is not bio-based. So how do we make sure that that is decarbonised, that we consider circularity, obviously, when we're designing or optimising those products as well, because a lot of the innovation activities is incremental performance improvements. So how do we build the whole story into that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in this environment where we have to be pragmatic, at some times, one of the things I really like of the things that you're trying to do, Michael, is that you're trying to push the boundaries and say, okay, that project, I'm going to see how far I can go. How much can I push into this one? And that serves as a reference for so many other projects. It doesn't mean that everything is going to be bio-based tomorrow, but you have a massive reference where you can say, okay, that performed this way, and that sets the reference for the others, which will be following what you do.
Exactly, and it can be done. One of the sometimes it's really funny to see that this social housing that I presented lately is a simple wooden structure with a wood fiber as insulation in between, and a cork facade. And the cork facade, that we created a brick wall, we engraved a brick wall because legislation told me, the law said to me that it had to be a brick wall. So it was 100% insulation from the inside till the outside. And we used cork, let's say, as a very expensive and there's not too much, not always available, so you have to be precise in where you use it, as a facade. Which really makes me laugh, because
that's a good example of how you have to find some solutions where it's not ready for that, but you still find a way to make it work. And
you see, the design process is very important, so it looks really nice, and it's energy neutral, of course, etc., etc.
Do you get any bottles of wine with that, or?
Sorry?
Do you get any bottles of wine with that, or?
And was that already available? Could you already purchase the cork engraved, or was that something that you guys innovated?
It's really available in the countries like France and Italy and Portugal, Spain. It's really common use material. So yes, you can use it.
And Sandra, I just want to explore something you said a little bit more. You talked about decarbonising current product sets, but surely the supply chain has quite a lot of input into decarbonisation.
Absolutely, yeah. So we're pushing every day. There has to be a lot of conversations with the supply chain, but it's obviously on us, or we're doing a lot of research ourselves, and we're doing a lot of testing ourselves to just get a better understanding and to have more informed conversations with our suppliers, of course. And We have very specific targets that we need to meet. So you're almost going into the conversation as like, this is the target, so how are we going to get there together? So again, to my point earlier about collaboration, the supply chain is part of that collaboration. It cannot happen without them. And that's actually great because they are experts for some of the materials. They have so much more knowledge than us. They might have come across something completely fundamentally new and they're not telling everybody about that yet. So it's just important to keep that conversation going and to keep pushing, of course. We want it tomorrow, but the reality is with some, we got to understand who we're working with. You know, they need to build a new plant, for example, and building a new plant might take them 5 years because of just the nature of what they're manufacturing. So we cannot change the products from one day to another because we think it's a good idea, but there's actually so much more that needs to happen in the background. And even if you look at products today that are available, be it on the bio-based side or any of the insulation technologies, there's years of innovation and work that has gone into that. I mean, many, many years, and that's not obvious, of course, because we launch a product and then it's there, great. But actually consider the 20 years that it took us to get there, you know, and the continuous improvements that it took us to get there. So yes, decarbonisation, and we'll absolutely get there. There's no question about that. It's just a question on when, and it's continuous push for it.
Cool.
But at the same time, we need your kind of input into that and your push, because you're then on the other side with your building owners. The more they're pushing, the more we can push as well, you know.
Yeah. In the Netherlands, it's right now we have this nitrogen crisis. So it's not a matter of when. Just I really have to push because I just cannot start building anymore.
Yeah.
So it's very important. So there you see, never waste a good crisis. Is this what they say? So we're really pushing right now.
And do you think that's the best way or the most effective way of driving demand is a crisis or?
No, of course not. But
regulation change. Benjamin, you mentioned regulatory issues earlier.
I mean, there are a lot of manufacturers that I speak that are just waiting for new laws and legislations, and they're not driven by, let's say, integrity or an integral ambition or something like that. So I wished it was different, but
I manage a lot of companies, and one of the sayings is that it's never love that moves the needle. There's a few good guys who are very passionate and have good intentions, and what moves the needle very often in human history is pain, and what we call in management a burning platform.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? I think we're sitting on a burning platform.
Okay. Okay, and Sandra, is there anything?
Absolutely agree. Like I couldn't add anything valuable to that. It's just perfect what you said. Yeah.
And is there any other innovation that you'd like to mention today, just to maybe finish up? Michael, we'll come to you first.
I'm thinking. No, I have no idea what kind of innovations that I would. I mean, I feel like I have a head start on everybody else. So catch up, please. That's it.
Yeah. Fair point.
Noted.
And then I think we'll get there together. I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure of it. Yeah. Maybe one thing for me, a building is, or the design process of a building is much more a holistic approach than looking at the manufacturers, for instance. So the workaround it's not easy, but it's one of my tasks. So for me, again, it's a holistic approach, and we can make a difference. And we need help from let's say the complete team creating the building. But it's just a tiny detail.
Yeah. And Sandra, anything you'd like to touch on?
There's a lot that I could be talking about. I suppose just to touch on a completely different point, because we've talked a lot about insulation materials themselves and the different types. What I find interesting and seeing at the moment is the likes of phase change materials. I'm not sure if you've come across that, but obviously water would be a good example of one where you freeze it and it gets hard and then it gets warm and turns it back into a liquid. So that type of material, in theory, can be used as a thermal storage in a building. So, you know, if you just take a cold store building and during the day this material takes up the energy and at night it releases it back. So you need, obviously at night, less energy to keep the building cold itself, or when you have a shortage of energy, it can kind of jump in to ensure continuity. But I find interesting with those type of things is how can we integrate that into the building envelope? Can we integrate that into an insulation board? Can we put it on an insulated panel? What would that look like? Because then all of a sudden you're not just insulating anymore, but you're actually generating. The building is doing something actively for you to improve the energy efficiency overall. And there's a lot of examples like that where you have almost two technologies that work really well, and we're trying to put it together to make it even greater, because there's only so much on some of those materials. There's only so much that you can do, so we got to be very creative and think outside of the box and really understand what is there and how can we combine it to create something new.
I would love to work on a project like that, because this really makes a difference. So now you're not talking about creating insulation itself, but you're just an energy storage concept or something like that. Now that's what I'm talking about. And now, are you the person that creates the insulation or the walls or the foundation or the et cetera, et cetera? So we actually did one of these projects in the Netherlands where we combined salt to store energy. And gives a really another perspective on how the building is used, and the building itself is let's say energy storage or a battery, for instance.
It's fascinating. And I guess innovation doesn't have to be something cooked up in a laboratory. It can be something that's born out of creativity, I guess.
It's exactly that. That was really the point I was thinking about. We think of innovation of a technical problem. Innovation's half of it is a technical problem, but the other half is a human problem. And I think we're all awakening, the world is awakening from a massive binge on resources, a binging on CO2, and got a little bit of a headache, and we're wondering what to do. And what I find in terms of innovation fantastic, very low key, is all these guys that in their own companies, not being necessarily the top management that defines a strategy for the next 20 years, but at each individual level in the construction industry, but it doesn't happen only in the construction industry, are becoming innovators, thinking like, okay, so what can I do? And it starts by something as stupid as putting selective bins, but it goes way beyond this. And I think innovation is this diffusion of the idea that we can. And the time is coming where we can change, really. And innovation, that's the biggest innovation. It's with us.
Well, we have to continue to ask ourselves the question, what if? What if we could do this, and what if we could do that? And that's how we will create new ideas. But thank you everybody. And thank you everybody at home for watching as well. We hope it was interesting for everybody. And if you have any questions, please do email them into Kingspan, and we'll be happy to come back to you on that.